Okay, ready? All right. Peace and love, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of our Reparations series with PE with ABC. I'm your host again, Ari Edmondson, and today we have another special guest, which we are very excited to have on our Reparations series today. We have Dr. Keith Claybrook, who is professor of Africana Studies at Cal State University, Long Beach. And before I start getting into the material for the day, I want to give Dr. Claybrook the chance to introduce yourself and just let the people know who you are and any other background info you'd like to give today.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me. Yes, so my name is Dr. Keith Claybrook, as introduced. Born and raised in Compton. I always start off with that. I'm gonna put my city on the map. For hard-nosed, academic, intellectual, and community activists, sort of work as well. I was teaching Department of Africana Studies, many of our, history, critical thinking classes. So I wear a lot of hats, so I can keep on going with my biography if you want me to, but I wear a lot of hats, do a lot of things. So if you want to get in deeper, feel free to ask. Otherwise, we can just jump right into it.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much for that. Again, this is going to be a very organic conversation, so glad to have you. Thank you for the background info, so we have more of personal feeling towards you. So with that being said, we're going to jump into the questions. And the reason why ABC wanted to bring on you today, Dr. Claybrook, is because we know that you have a lot of background within Africana Studies, just with research, and also for the fact that personally, I had met you before I was a student at Cal State Long Beach. And, I had been a part of your event that was called Who Will Pay Reparations on My Soul, which at the time, I wasn't aware that it was, based on a song by Gil Scott-Heron. And, through that experience, it allowed me to even think of that question, because oftentimes when we think about reparations, we don't necessarily think of it in terms of that type of metaphor, or we don't think of it in that way. So we want to kind of bring that into the conversation that we've been having about reparations for the month of February. So today, just with the first question, we want to know what importance does the title of today's discussion have to you, and what does it bring up for you? So just to start off with that.
Yeah, so the whole conversation around reparations oftentimes is framed in the context of unpaid labor, during the enslavement period, and understandably so. But when we look at the lyrics of the song "Who Will Pay Reparations for Who Will Pay Reparations on My Soul," it starts off and takes us into, okay, once we get paid, because it says, pieces of silver, pieces of gold. Okay, once that happens, then who will pay reparations on my soul? And so if we can assume just for a moment, and I think we can agree that the enslavement of African people is a traumatic event. That was a traumatic experience that was experienced by multiple generations. Yes, the economic aspect of it is important, and not going to downplay that. But there's research, there's scholarship out there that suggests that trauma can be passed down genetically. So on a deeper level, there's the unpaid labor that needs to be addressed. But who will pay reparations on my soul? And so this is something on an individual level, the soul is from the Creator. It's the life force. It's that divine aspect in all of us. And that was also attacked and traumatized during this experience. Who will pay reparations on my soul? When you take a look at it more collectively, the soul of a people is their culture. That was attacked and traumatized. When you fast forward after the enslavement period, when chattel slavery is outlawed, right? We see new forms of slavery, right, that begin to emerge, because the power relationship and the power dynamic did not change just because of the passing of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment to the American Constitution. The power relationships and power dynamics did not change. Enter in the Black codes, enter in Jim Crow, enter in the prison industrial complex, enter in the war on poverty and the war on drugs, as Tupac and others have said, that's really just a war, and on Black people, it's a war in an excuse to come bother me. Who will pay reparations on my soul? Yes, it's my unpaid labor, but I'm more than just my labor. I'm part of the divine. I'm part of a group of people. I'm part of a culture that has been traumatized for generations. Yes, there are critics and criticisms of this idea of intergenerational trauma. But even with that, the same group of people have experienced trauma from generation to generation to generation. So even if it's not passed on genetically, it's still being experienced generationally. Who will pay reparations on my soul? So we accept this conversation about unpaid labor. And then we are asking, what about our humanity? What about our soul? So Gil Scott Heron is asking this question, in when did that song come out? In 1970. He's already asking this, who will pay reparations on my soul? So that's what comes to mind, and that's what this song, is about. You can go ahead and pay for the back wages, assuming that were to happen, but who'll pay reparations on my soul is also part of the conversation.
No, absolutely, and thank you so much for that, Dr. Claybrook, because I feel like this is an important part to again bring into our conversation about reparations, as those who have been tuned in before learn about reparations from the perspective of student debt, and that's one big aspect for students to relate to. However, when you think about the generational trauma, one example that comes to my mind is I had a personal conversation with my auntie who's in her 70s now, and it wasn't necessarily about reparations, but it was about like her past and things like of that nature, what happened to her in the workforce. And she didn't often like to bring it up because there was a lot of trauma that happened to her within the workforce because of like racism and things of that nature. And it just goes to show that there may be a lot of other things that are not being told, right, to me or other family members because of the trauma that's there that may be hard for her to bring up. And it's not just her, but these are other elders that I've talked to specifically though about reparations, where it was hard for them to bring up certain things that have happened, whether it was sharecropping or things of that nature, because of the trauma that was apparent with that experience. So I really appreciate you bringing that into the conversation because it's very much needed. And you kind of touched on it a little bit as far as like your analysis on, this idea of who will pay reparations on our souls. But I want to know, a few years ago with the event that you hosted with the same title of today's discussion, what significance did that event have for you, and why did you choose that theme during the time? And I believe it was about 3 years ago now already, or about 2 years ago.
I think it was what, November 2019, I think it was. Mm-hmm. That sounds about right. So there was a lot of momentum around HR 40, House of Representatives, 40, right? This bill to study the experience of Black folks in this country, towards, possibly, reparations, that sort of thing. And there was a lot of momentum, with Representative Sheila Jackson Lee after several years, of it being introduced and not getting out of committee. There's momentum. We wanted to continue that conversation. And so this artistic performance, right? We used the performing arts really to not only entertain, but also to educate, to empower, and even to heal, right? Because there's an element of healing that still needs to take place. And this is something that no amount of money for back pay is going to address. There's certain things that we have to get out, that we have to express. And sometimes singing, dancing, right? Artistic expression is the way that some of us feel comfortable getting that out. And so we provided that outlet. But then also for those who the arts may not be their thing in terms of performing, they're probably more apt to listen to a 3-minute song or a 90-second, poem or interpretive dance for a few minutes than to listen to someone like me lecture for 45 minutes, right? Now, don't get me wrong, I can lecture for 45 minutes and I won't even bat an eye, but different folks are going to respond and need to be reached in different ways. And I think one of the things that we tried to do was through song, through poetry, through dance, in other mediums, was to be able to continue that conversation about reparations and add to it as well that there's a cultural dimension. There's a cultural dimension along with the economic and political dimension. And I think that's what we were trying to offer. And I think that we were very successful that night, given the feedback that we got from those who were present and those who watched. I think we did it on Facebook Live and Instagram Live, I think, and we recorded it and we put it up later. And we had some very favorable reactions. So I think it also sparked some conversations. What is this thing, reparations? Okay, I thought it was just about money. So you're saying that, but that's the type of conversation that we were hoping, to initiate and to spark. And so by doing that, I think we were very successful at it.
I definitely can say that, it was a success. And even for me as a student, coming to that event and being a part of the event, that was my first time thinking of reparations in that way. And so, I did a piece or spoken word, and even when writing that, it was different for me because I'm usually writing just from my own personal perspective, whether it's like what I'm going through in my life. And so having to write about a specific topic that doesn't even really cross my mind helped me to really like associate with the feelings, right, of those who may have went through the many different things that we've experienced as a people that have been damaging to like our spirit, our mentality, and things of that nature. So I think it was very successful, not just bringing it to our awareness, but also like continuing this conversation, which is why it's again brought up today, and now it's 2 years later, because it's still relevant. So I appreciate you bringing light to that. And I kind of want to go deeper into why we think of reparations as purely economical. And oftentimes we think of reparations as economical, but how does the idea of paying reparations on our souls address other components in fighting for reparations, and why is it a necessary part of the conversation? So whether it's mental health facilities or etc., I want you to kind of dive deeper onto this subject.
So yeah, and that's a good question, and it requires, okay, I got to go into teacher mode for a moment, right? But it requires some definitions. It requires clarity on language, I think. And there's a conceptual definition of reparations. There's an operational definition of reparations. By conceptual definition, and I'm borrowing this from a reparations organization right here in Los Angeles, Reparations United Front, that was founded by Dr. David Horn, who I worked with, for a number of years. But there's a conceptual definition. By conceptual, that's the abstract or theoretical, the understanding of reparations. And so organizations like NCOBRA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. And we use this language of, repairing and healing and restoring. Well, it brings the question of, if you have to repair, then that means that at some point it was whole. It was all together. Well, if we take a look at African history, we see that Africans did not see themselves as a collective unit, as a collective body with a central government, central economic system, central military, government, and things of that nature. They saw themselves as different people. Now, so what's being repaired here on that level? To suggest healing means that there's something, that's being, that there's this element that we have to get, better from. Well, when were we well? If this is a sickness, when were we well? And what does that look like? How do you measure that? How do you, identify when that occurs? So I'm not saying that these things didn't happen, but I am saying in terms of operationally, and now that moves me to the other term, right? This operational definition, and by operational, we're talking about concepts, that look at things in a concrete sort of way, right? That can be explained, that can be observed, that can be measured. So what Reparations United Front does, and I don't mean to sound like I'm, giving a plug or a push, right, towards, RUF, but I appreciate the language to articulate the significance and the nuancing in this language. So what RUF has done is provide us with an operational definition. And this operational definition has external and internal components. So external reparations for Reparations United Front then requires that we are given an apology, which is a regretful acknowledgement of an offense or a failure or a wrongdoing, an atonement, that's some satisfactory amends for that wrongdoing, and then compensation, that's something given or received as an equivalent, or services, debt, injury, suffering, lack thereof, right? So when you have an apology that's come through, you can check that off. Okay, here comes the apology. Okay, we can check that off the list. Okay, here's the atonement, some amends for the wrong. Okay, we can check that off. The compensation. Okay, here's it comes. There's the form that it came in. We can check that off. That's operational. I know when that happened. I know when that occurred, and so I'm able then to identify, this is reparations. This is when it came. This is the form that it came in. And then there's internal reparations. The internal reparations refers to an assessment, an identification of what we want and what we need, right? So the external reparations, this is what has to come from these other folks towards us. It could be the US government, it could be businesses and corporations, it could be churches, mosques and synagogues and so on and so forth. But then there's internal reparations. And so part of what RUF advocates for and was doing, surveying as many Black folk as possible. What do we need? What do we need? And there's a diversity of things, from money in our pockets and healthcare and free education and these sorts of things. But also there's this call for, and the Association of Black Psychologists and some of their allies, have worked towards these healing circles to address the legacy of enslavement and subsequent racial injustices that we've experienced on individual as well as collective. And we've experienced on an individual and a collective level. Well, these are things that we have to do. There's that internal work that we have to do. And so that operational definition, along with the operational definition, then allows us to enter into a more tangible conversation, I think, than these conceptual definitions of repairing and healing. No. We need to be clear on when these things happen and what they look like. And when we're clear on that, then some of the more difficult conversations, when they come up, because they have come up, we now have a starting point and a common language from which to understand them, and so we can make sense of them. Because one of the most difficult things, let's say right now, let's say our leaders, so to speak, get contacted. We're gonna give y'all reparations. Just tell us what way you want it and who to give it to. Do you know what type of chaos that would cause in our communities? Who's Black enough to get these reparations? A directory of Blackness. Okay, no. We only gonna give it to those who are descendants of enslaved Africans. Okay, prove it. I don't know about you, but my family, we can't go back, far enough to be able to prove that. Some of our records have been destroyed. How do you prove that? What if you had someone who immigrated here from Haiti or Jamaica in 1902, and them and their family, they've been here for over 100 years now. They weren't enslaved in the United States, but they were enslaved in the Caribbean. But they did suffer assaults by the Klan and White Citizens Council and whomever else. They suffered Jim Crow, so on and so forth. Did they not get it? Right. And so we know this because these debates amongst ourselves are happening right here, right now, today. They're already happening. So clarity in language, clarity in definition, I'm not going to say it's going to rid ourselves of that, but it can, I think, help with some of that if we have an operational, definition that we're working from and begin to move away from the conceptual definitions. So I know I just said a lot. Did I address your question?
No, you most definitely did address your question. And I think that you provided a lot of different, insight within answering the question as well. That makes me even want to ask more questions too. But for lack of time, we'll ask them at a different time. However, I did want to bring up or just acknowledge, the fact that you brought up the language part, because I feel like that is a key, reason why we're having these discussions, because we understand, that there are different components to reparations already, but knowing that there's different language, even just to this one word, is very important as well. Because when you're in, meetings, whether it's you're addressing HR 40 in a meeting, and you're representing an organization like ABC, or you're meeting with city council members and things of that nature, you're able to understand the use of the language to talk about or address specific things under the umbrella of reparations. And I think that is a very powerful tool to have when in conversation about this, because it allows us to have a better awareness about what exactly it is we're talking about, and how there's a functionality component to reparations that can, be practiced rather than just, spoken about. And I also just wanted to, touch on and, appreciate you bringing up Reparations United Front, because they have been a huge part of, my understanding of like reparations and just, organizing as well. And I actually had brought this paper up because I went to one of their meetings, and they would give each and every person one of these when we would walk inside. And it's, like, what is reparations, what isn't it? And you also brought up the fact that there may be some people that have, immigrated here, whether it's like from Haiti or other places. And one of the things I wanted to note from what they had on this sheet was that, reparations is a national and international struggle that is connected with global reparation struggle. The vestiges of colonialism and capitalism affect us even today. And so like them adding that to this paper allowed me to say, okay, we can't just think of reparations from the standpoint of only, this is only applicable to those who are in the United States, while it should be, and this is up for debate too, but a priority to some degree for those who are enslaved, it is not, and within the United States, it does not negate those who are, struggling as well as African people, are those who are, racialized to be Black within America in other parts of the, the world. They shouldn't be reparations. So I really appreciate you bringing up all these different components, because they're needed for our overall understanding of the struggle that has been happening so far. So to go on to to our next question, we talked about the different things in regards to African people in the United States. However, African people, and more specifically elders, right, have been emotionally and psychologically traumatized by the Holocaust of enslavement, as well as, other violent implications that come with colonial and imperial domination. How can we work towards repairing these damages as a part of the call for reparations? So, want us to kind of focus on solution-based, answers to reparations.
How can we say the question again? How can we do what?
Yep. So how can we work towards repairing these damages as a part of the call for reparations? That was like the end part of the question. You want me to say the whole thing again?
So you're if I can borrow that language, internal reparations and the external reparations, you're more so asking a question that it relates to the internal reparations part, right? What we need to do for ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah, that's that in and of itself will take a while to answer. So, but I'll try to keep it short.
Yeah.
Clarity in the continuance of history is important. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is to ensure that we don't understand history episodically. And how about I'll use an analogy. For those of us who've watched, whatever the series may be, whether it's Star Wars and you have your trilogies and, this 9 episodes, maybe some folks are into, I don't know, what was that one everybody was into a few years ago on HBO, Game of Thrones, and you have several, seasons and all different episodes within the seasons. I know my kids, they watch, Vampire Diaries and some of these other sorts of things, stuff like that. All right. Queens is out now with, Brandy and, Eve and all right. Okay. So watching one episode, several seasons in, moving forward, does not help us. And it could be great and you could be into it, but you don't understand the whole picture. You don't understand the whole picture. And so watching, those series, in that respect, we get into it, we get interested, and then what do many of us do? We go back to the beginning, binge watch them, right, and get caught up so we can understand the totality of what was going on. All right, what does that mean for us? What I see in the classroom, semester in and semester out, is many of our students, and this is across, not even just Black students, it's like across the board. Many of our students, if it didn't happen in their lifetime, it's not important. I can talk about something from 1980, and it might as well have been 1880. The understanding, of history, and how it contributes to how we got here today in 2022 is important. I heard Dr. John Henrik Clarke say in a lecture years ago, he said the person who first sneezed is still influencing the atmosphere. And I was like, well, no, he doesn't. Like, he sneezed a long time. Like, oh, wait a second. There's more ripple effects that's going on beyond what we can see. And so without an understanding and an appreciation of that, you don't understand what Dr. Clarke just said. So we have some of us who are trying to address an issue that is hundreds of years old by only looking at what happened from last year forward. Discounting what their parents went through, discounting what their grandparents and great-grandparents and so forth went through. I'm not saying you have to be a historian, but I am saying to have a working understanding of history. If you go to the doctor first, what are you in for? What's been going on? Getting a history. Your car breaks down. You go to the mechanic. What's been going on? History. You can't fix what's going on today for a better tomorrow without understanding what happened yesterday. One of the best things that I could have done as a child to help me appreciate this conversation we're having today was conversations with my grandmothers. And you know how, your grandmama said, baby, now let me tell you, because see, when I was growing up, baby, we didn't have all these things y'all kids got today. We was just happy to be, baby, I was a sharecropper. Okay, you know what that is? I had to work and don't get paid. I mean, and they just go into these stories, right? And grandmama, why are you telling me all of this? All these sorts of things, right? But don't really appreciate it till I got older and had more context. Oh, that's what she was talking about. Now I understand how that connects to this here. One of the things that I did some of my research, and I think you may know this, a lot of my research is on the Black student movement from the in the 60s, and I kind of focused on here in Los Angeles. And in some of my interviews and some of my research that I've done, a lot of the folks was actually saying that they wish they would have spent more time reading and in conversation with elders. There was a saying that they actually kind of like, don't trust anybody over 30. Don't trust anybody over 30. Well, you ain't nothing but 19. What understanding of the world? I'm like, yeah, you got your own understanding of the world, but you think this person who's 64 don't have something to offer to contribute? And so being a student of history and valuing and appreciating, the insight. I'm not saying we got to agree with everything they say, but I am saying to listen to what they have to offer and where it comes from and how they got to that point. The other thing is this, and many of us like to talk about Willie Lynch. This Willie Lynch letter and all different ways to divide us. Those who's in the hill, those who's in the valley, those who's in the big house, those who's in the field, light skin, the dark skin, male, female. We talk about it, and then we reproduce it ourselves, right? And it's been very successful, that whole divide and conquer sort of thing. And so there's discourse, even within our own community, Black men against Black women, middle-class Black folk and the working poor, those who call themselves, African-centered, and those who call themselves, scientific socialists. So there's tensions. But in my assessment, when we get to the root of the analysis of what they're saying, all of us are looking for the same thing: freedom. We're looking for human respect and dignity, as well as increased quality of life and material conditions. But we argue amongst each other, whether it's age or gender or sexuality, what have you. And Malcolm X warned us about this and spoke to us about this, long ago. He was like, don't get caught up in the differences in strategies and approaches to the same objective. Stay focused on our objective. So when we're having those conversations and we're engaging in study and we're engaging in activism, don't get caught up in alienating a potential ally who has the same objective simply because they are operating from a different ideological position and tactical strategy. Don't alienate each other who have the same objective. Easier said than done. Easier said than done, no doubt. But at least entering into those conversations with that point of departure, entering into a conversation with the intentions of coming to a consensus as opposed to coming into a conversation to get my way. That's a completely different point of departure when I'm entering that conversation. And I enter that conversation open to conversation as opposed to stopping conversation to make sure that my way is the way that gets heard and it's my way or the highway, so to speak. So I think, just that clarity, I'm just, there's much more I could say, right? But I'm just about clarity in the historical understanding, even just a working one. And then also coming to the table with clarity in our objective, working towards a consensus as opposed to working towards getting my way. Those two things in and of itself, I think are very important in moving this conversation of internal reparations forward.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Claybrook. Your answers are on fire. You know what I'm saying? As I'm like, seriously though, like as I'm listening, a lot of things are popping up in my mind. One thing, of course, that came to my mind was, just this idea of Sankofa, which in ABC, BSU, we hold that value very dear to us. In regards to looking back to our history and to making sure that we have the necessary tools to continue to move forward, and that is very important in regards to reparations. And actually, when we're talking about this internal aspect of reparations, this is a part that we're going to be talking about in our next series, which is bridging the gap in regards to reparations from the perspective of the elders versus those that are younger, because we know that it is important to make sure that the youth and the elders are having.
Can I pause you for just a moment?
Sure.
Even just the way you just phrased it, the way in which the elders view reparations versus, even that language of versus now puts it in competition, right? So I would I just wanted to just kind of point that out, because again, a different way of phrasing that is having a conversation between elders and youth about reparations to try to find some common understanding is a different point of departure than saying versus. I don't think that that's what you intended to like talk about, like the some tenuous, conversation. But I do think that as those who's in this work, who's trying to move this forward, we have to be very intentional about our language. And some of us, we're going to misspeak. Anybody who does anything and you do public speaking and you speak like you're going to misspeak. It happens. But the more that we can be mindful of that and intentional in that language, I think we can we'll give those adversaries who's looking for places to widen the divide, we'll give them further ammunition. So if we can just get a little bit, mindful and intentional on some of those things. So I apologize for interrupting you, but that was just one of those prime examples there that I wanted to highlight, of that language of verses in and of itself kind of pits us against each other.
No, right. And thank you for, stopping me on that too. Because, we're all about teaching moments. And, as you say, like in your classes, we're like growing and developing scholars. So for me, like this is all like I'm listening a lot and learning from the conversation. So of course that wasn't the intention with the title, but I thank you for bringing it up, because the goal is never to be divisive, but it is to bring in us elders and the youth together to have this conversation, so we understand, okay, is my, as a young person, right, is my understanding of reparations different from what I learned or what you learned during your generation, and if so, why is that the case? And how can we make sure that we're building a consensus, right, as you said before, so we can continue to make this important parts of our dialogue. So I appreciate that. And as we're beginning to wrap up our conversation for the day, I do want to touch back quickly on Gil Scott Heron's song "Who Will Pay Reparations on My Soul," which is our title for today. And if you can like kind of go back to around the first introduction of the song that you had, or just like kind of the last time you heard it and thinking of the lyrics, what message was, he's sending in this song, and what can we take away maybe from like certain words as you remember, or just in general, what can we take away from that song if we were to listen to it today?
Yeah, I think, and I think that's an important question to kind of end on, because the conversation around reparations includes enslavement, but it also moves beyond enslavement. So there's the passage, call my brother a junkie because he ain't got no job. Well, that's not talking about during the enslavement period. That's later. This is later, right? Well, okay, we're going to talk about the junkie, right? We use that language in the 70s. Okay, right? That individual or individuals who has an addiction, to drugs, whether they are, legal or illegal, drugs, what have you, right? Call him a junkie because he ain't got no job. Well, that brings the question: why is he, using those drugs? Was he medicating, from? Was he medicating for? What's going on? What hurt is trying to be numbed? Okay, if he doesn't have a job, why doesn't he have a job? This is America, right? Like, like, why is somebody working? So what's going on here, right? So it's passages like that that should bring in more questions. Told my old man to leave me when times got hard. Again, why is he leaving? Just because times got hard? Well, we have to have an understanding of history. At a certain point in history, we understand that those that men could not receive welfare. Women could receive welfare. But if a man was in the home, even if he was unemployed, she didn't qualify. But if the unions aren't allowing this Black man in, and he does not being protected and supported by unions, and Black men, if they got hired, would oftentimes be the first one fired when things got lean. What's the most responsible thing that this man could do if his family is struggling? Is leave. How many stories we have from Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas. The man leaves and goes west. The man leaves and goes north looking for a job, and he leaves his wife and his children. So he's out the home. So now she can receive welfare. He can provide by leaving. Then he can go someplace else, make money, and then send money back to his family. Okay, now some of these guys may have gone on ahead and got a new family in the place that they went, but and that's an important conversation as well, because we have to talk about the Black family and all these dynamics. But again, in this song, it brings questions. Why was he told he had to leave when times got hard? Told my mother she got to carry me by herself. Why is she being told these things? Right. So there's these other sections of the song that's post-enslavement that continues to address the trauma that we talked about earlier, right? That the trauma was not only during the enslavement, the trauma continued even after 1865. The trauma continues in 2022. Gil Scott Heron, the song's title is a question. The issues that he brings up should raise more questions. Some of us have all the answers. And I remember my grandfather telling me when I was a kid, he said, be careful of folks who have all the answers, because that person doesn't know anything. Sometimes what's more important than the answer is the question. So I look at all this from who will pay reparations on my soul, and I get more questions than I have answers. What was Gil Scott Heron observing? What was he exposed to? What did he learn over the years that had him addressing all of these things. And then bringing his other songs, Angel Dust, bringing his other songs, um, um, home is where the hatred is, and what's the word, Johannesburg. I mean, I can go on and on. Winter in America, right? What's he talking about? And dig a little bit deeper and ask more questions. So for me, this song, it begins with a question and it ends with a question. Who will pay reparations on my soul? Why does your soul need reparations? Who did something to your soul? What did they do to your soul? How do we heal your soul? What do we need to put in place to heal your soul? And when I say your soul, I'm saying that individually, and I'm saying it collectively. A forest is made up of individual trees. If we only look at one individual tree and neglect the forest, that's counterproductive. How do we tend to the forest? Being mindful that there's individual trees that also have their individual needs as well. It begins with a question, it ends with a question. Who will pay reparations on my soul?
And just like that, you should have wrote your own song, Dr. Claybrook. The whole soundtrack by this point. Yes, no, absolutely. And this is, an important, I think, point to leave on again is for us when we're looking back on these talks, for those who are going to be watching this video later on, or those who are going to be, watching some of our conversations from previous ones that we've had, we should continue to be raising questions as we're having these conversations so that way we have more things to bring to the table when trying to demand reparations, right? So this is, very important. And I really appreciate you bringing that up. And just to, end off, we're wrapping up. Are there any last words that you like to leave, the people today before we wrap up today's conversation?
Yes, I think I do. Is to, stay active, stay involved, but understand that there's multiple ways of being involved. Right? We don't all have to be out there on the front lines. The people who's in the back providing supplies is just as important as those who's in the front lines in harm's way. It's just as important for some of us to go on and become attorneys, because we're going to need revolutionary attorneys to help out legally the revolutionaries who got themselves legally bound. Don't forget Dr. King, and he's the peaceful one. He's the peaceful one, right? And he had a cadre of attorneys who was on call to help him out along the way. So we need conscious attorneys. We need conscious doctors. We need conscious teachers. We need while we're doing this work, we strategically place ourselves in different positions to be not only heard, but to amass power in those places, so that not only are we heard, but we can make change. And that change comes in part, not only with us being in the room, but also when we're able to impact and affect policy. So us learning how to read policy, create policy, read budgets, make budgets, right? We'll be in a position to be able to address some of these other concerns. I'm not saying it's going to be the end all to everything that we're dealing with, but I am saying to arm ourselves and equip ourselves, because the battlefield is wide and we need different people who are equipped at different places on the battlefield to address the concerns that we have in front of us today and tomorrow.
And there it is, my friends. Your beautiful last words by Dr. Keith Claybrook today for our reparation series, this one titled Who will pay reparations on my soul. I want to thank you again, Dr. Claybrook, for being with us here today, for providing all of your, amazing, background, insight, and just everything that, you provided for us today. This is very much going to be used as a tool, not only for ABC, but for all of the students and, community organizers that come back and use this as a tool for their liberation. So we appreciate you. We hope that everyone taps in again to all of our other videos and content coming up soon for our reparations campaign. And until next time, thank you so much.
Thank you.